Civilian and defense agencies will have tons of data, as you can see, to use to help them make a wide variety of decisions. One area where that data will be particularly important to agencies is the use of autonomous vehicles. Agencies all over government are using drones now and thinking about how to use self-driving cars when they're available. Paul Brubaker is president and CEO of the Alliance for Transportation Innovation. Paul, thanks for coming on the program. Autonomous vehicles are already making news. We've seen lots of coverage about drones in the Defense Department. A couple of weeks back, China stole was the term that the Defense Department used, a drone in the South China Sea. What do you expect to see moving forward when it comes to both civilian and defense agencies using autonomous vehicles?
Well, I think they're going to be increasingly reliant on autonomous vehicles. It's very clear. And I think it's in some ways a little easier for the Defense Department to experiment with these devices, whether they're floating platforms, sensor platforms that are fully autonomous that have been around for a while. You've got companies like Liquid Robotics out in California that produces these platforms, or whether it's drones and certainly autonomous vehicles. And Tank and Automotive Command, for example, in the Army has been experimenting with autonomy. They've got some significant pilots at Fort Bragg and at Fort Hood, and they're thinking about doing one that moves soldiers via buses at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri. So there's a lot of potential there. Where I think there's a wee bit of a disconnect is in the commercial sector, and it's mostly rooted in the regulation that governs how the private sector can actually get these vehicles to the road. I'll give you a specific example. We just came back from the Consumer Electronics Show. And really the theme for a large part of that show was on autonomous vehicles, whether it's drones or in the North Hall, which is almost entirely devoted to autonomous cars, if you will. And then we look at companies like Otto, who are playing in the space where they're moving 18-wheelers autonomously and just did the first commercial delivery of beer from Fort Collins, Colorado, down to Colorado Springs. Those have profound implications on the supply chain, but what we're worried about is you've got all this innovation going on, and then there's a slight disconnect, not a slight disconnect, but actually an obstacle, if you will, a regulatory obstacle to accelerate the deployment of those vehicles into the commercial space. And that concerns us because we believe that autonomous vehicles are the key to improving safety. Every year in the United States, we lose tens of thousands of people. Last year, it was over 35,000 people. It looks like that number is going to tick up. It's roughly 100 people dying every day on this nation's roads. And we as Americans have this sort of over-exaggerated sense of our own ability to control these vehicles. But let's keep in mind that, that human error is responsible for 94% of those fatalities, according to NHTSA. That's a problem. And we've got the technology in our grasp to really potentially eliminate 94% of those fatalities. So we're talking 30,000 lives a year that can be saved if we can speed deployment of these technologies. So there's this imperative to do it both for safety reasons and for societal transformation reasons. We're going to have increased accessibility to people with disabilities, to the aged, to people who have been economically underserved by fixed route transportation. So we're at an inflection point. This technology is absolutely transformational if regulation can get out of the way.
All of the regulatory issues are what we seem to hear the most about. What we don't hear as much about is how agencies will make these decisions policy-wise internally when these technologies become available. Is now the time to start thinking about that, or when these technologies are ready to deploy, when, for example, GSA is ready to go out and buy some autonomous vehicles for the fleet, is that when we start to think about these?
Well, no, I think we should be thinking about it right now, and I think, frankly, GSA should be seriously considering experimenting with autonomous vehicles in their fleet today. There are a number of applications that they could encourage, and government should encourage. It's one of the reasons why we think a lot of the advances that can be made and the government can facilitate are outside of the purview of the Transportation Department. It's one of the reasons why we created something that we call the National Strategic Framework for Accelerating the Deployment of Life-Saving Self-Driving Vehicles. And we recognize that there are a number of federal agencies that play in this space, whether it's NIST on the embedded cyber for automotive systems, whether it's GSA on the fleet management, or even like and it's not obvious, but people should be thinking about the National Park Service and how they could better improve the visitor experience, even by experimenting with these vehicles, even down on the mall, on how we move people around the museums. There are pilot projects that we're strongly in favor of, and we think that by exposing the public to the powers of autonomous vehicle and really get people to literally kick the tires of these vehicles and understand the promise that they hold for saving lives and improving mobility, we think that's incredibly powerful. It's one of the reasons why last week at CES we announced our National Autonomous Vehicle Road Trip, and you can find that at www.avroadtrip.org. And we're going to, phase one is going to go to 6 cities in the United States. We start in Atlanta on the 26th of January and in San Jose on the 9th of February. And we're just looking to expose people to these technologies and let people experience them firsthand. But we think government plays a pretty significant role in accelerating the deployment just by showing people what this technology can do and what it's all about. And I think Defense Department can help lead. Cross-pollinating those experiences with AVs with the civilian sector is really, really important, and we hope to facilitate that dialogue.
Paul Brubaker, thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, friend.